It's time for Wretched Radio with Todd Friel.
This is going to be a team effort. This is Wretched Radio. Pretty much
you in trouble.
Anybody who can pontificate is these days trying to explain why we are seeing so many stories of sexual abuse allegations. Certainly, something seismic has shifted in our country for this to be going on so regularly. The recent story, of course, Matt Lauer, it would appear, if everybody's telling the truth, yikes. He wasn't a gentleman at all. Why, though, has the dam burst? And all of these stories are now happening. I think that we need to start with, are these stories new? The answer is no. They're just being reported now. There is nothing really to indicate that unregenerate men have ever not been acting like, unregenerate men. Now, the more unregenerate men you have, the more unregenerate behavior you're going to witness. And so I think that's one of the reasons we might be seeing more. We're less Christian than we used to be. And that, I think, is one of the reasons why we are seeing so much of this. We're simply less Christian. That's all. There's going to be more. Godly men, godly behavior. Pagan men, pagan behavior. I think that's one explanation. I do believe that there's others. And I think a part of it has to do with the word shame. Shame is a common grace given by God. And the civilization that has sharper consciences has more shame, and that is a good thing. It curbs pagan behavior. It can even help a Christian to not be tempted to sin. We tend to talk about shame like, oh, it's a terrible thing. Now, I think that we as Christians need to be careful. I don't think we're supposed to be heaping shame on people. As a parent, perhaps you've said, shame on you. I'm not sure that that's the best parenting approach. I think shame is something that should happen naturally. We shouldn't heap it on somebody. But inside of a household where it is recognized that sinful behavior is a bad thing, it is a shameful thing, it can curb a child's behavior. It can curb an adult's behavior. It can curb culture's behavior. Less shame, more sinning. But I think there are more reasons that we are seeing so many of these accusations these days. Again, statistically, is it happening more now than it did in, say, 1987? Nobody knows for sure. I suspect we are indeed seeing more of it as our culture continues to unravel. I think there's just more of it. It wasn't gone. It never is. There can even be sexual abuse inside of the church. But I think the less Christian, the more of this that we are going to see. But I think another reason is the culture's attitude toward sex. It's changed. It's free love, Daddy-o. It's do what makes you happy. After all, it was, still hurts a little bit, our former president who said love is love. And we've had feminists fighting for this for years, and men have been mostly silent about it, but simply, if you will, reaping the sinful benefits. Fine. You want to remove sex from the context of marriage? Most unregenerate men are going to jump for joy at that notion. More nudity on TV. Game of Thrones. Free love. Hook up culture. Shame in that arena is coming down. And because of that, I think that you're going to see more and more people who don't feel embarrassed about sharing it. I think that's at least in part what we're seeing. Why they are not embarrassed. People used to be embarrassed about this. They wouldn't talk about it. You see, men used to be embarrassed at the thought of getting caught for it. Now we are seeing women who would have, say, 20 years ago, pick a number, who would have been perhaps too embarrassed to admit it, don't seem to be embarrassed anymore. Now, by the way, just as an aside, this is not a commentary on whether or not every woman is telling the truth or not. It's not the point of this at all. Men no longer feel shame for being dogs, And women no longer seem to feel shame to confess it. It's an interesting social phenomenon, if you ask me, because women historically would have been a little bit embarrassed about this. Why are they no longer feeling that way? Now, it could be a good thing or a bad thing. I'm not sure any sociologist, and certainly not I, knows the reason for why women are now willing to go on national TV, and that does seem to be a part of the pattern, doesn't it? That they're willing to go on national TV and say that they were abused. I think that's a sign of a radically shifted culture, that we are no longer a Christian nation. Again, if a guy has been a lout and he gets busted for it, great. I don't think anybody in the church should have a problem with that. We should cheer for that. We want justice. But there does seem to be a reason that I think is at least worth noting. Why don't women feel embarrassed about this anymore? And I think that is a fruit of a desensitized culture. If once upon a time, it used to be considered nasty to spit on the sidewalk. Now, while I believe it still should be, because there's no reason for that ever, I don't care what you got going on inside of your nasal cavity or in your lungs, you don't need to hock one on the sidewalk. But I digress. When culture decides it's not such a bad thing to suddenly start spitting on the sidewalk, no big deal. And that's what we're seeing. On the other hand, for somebody to say that they stepped in somebody's goober, now, while that may still be considered gross, my point is, it's like, yeah, what's the big deal? People spit on the sidewalk. What's the deal? When something becomes normative, it's no longer a big deal. And so I think that what we are seeing is it is now normative to act like a dog. Now, don't get me wrong. This is not clear-cut, because I understand. The left is still acting in response to this somewhat normally, like that is inappropriate. This is complex, but I do believe that the reason why we are seeing so much of what we are seeing is because the shame factor on both sides, the abuser and the abusee, has just gone down in the arena of sex. We're living in a culture that is absolutely post-Christian, story after story. Holiday displays. Do we need more stories like this? They're all over the place. Apparently in, I believe it's Washington, D.C., the Archdiocese of Washington wanted to extend an invitation to commuters to find a Christmas gift by advertising on city buses. But the Washington Metro Area Transit Authority said no. In the meantime, they accepted ad money and put up the posters for gay hookup ads. We're just living in a different world right now. That's all. Now, how we respond to this, I think it is indeed the issue. And I honestly think it starts with recognizing we're strangers living in a strange land. And I don't think that's a bad thing. We are simply living in a culture that is different than the one certainly our parents grew up in, probably you grew up in. It's been ripped out from underneath you. How now will we live? What are we seeing going on? You're seeing complete moral confusion. No, none of this is really making complete sense. Why? Because the foundations, they're being ripped out. Thanks to progressives, thanks to secular humanists. And by the way, don't forget this. All of the rotten fruit that you see, I think we need to put it in a secular humanist basket and deliver it to the atheists, the agnostics, and those people who don't think that Jesus should have anything to do with anything. Here it is. This culture is officially yours. In a true Christian culture, you won't see these things, at least not to this degree. You do in a pagan world, so congratulations, all y'all who have been trying to get God out of the marketplace, out of culture. This is now yours, and it all hangs right on your head. And I don't think we should forget that. Believe me, that they use Christian culture and its fruit. Now, they pervert it, of course. Oh, it's oppression. The Christians have just been treating women horribly, and then they're terrible, and it's all that. Well, what's good for the Christian goose, I think might be good for the pagan gander. Congratulations. You don't like what Matt Lauer did? You don't like what Harvey Weinstein did? It's all yours. Christians would have something to say about this. You have no moral standard. In fact, you have been preaching. Hollywood has been preaching free love, licentiousness, loutish behavior. And all of a sudden, when men, they discover, are acting the way that they've been telling men to act, they're absolutely abhorred. Total, utter moral confusion. What's our response? Same response it should always be. If you were going on a missions trip to a pagan country like America, what would you do? Get involved in politics or preach the gospel? This is Wretched Radio. Don't forget, if you would like to hear the entire daily broadcast, simply visit wretched.org, go to iTunes, figure out your favorite Android listening platform, and you can listen to the entire program every single day, downloaded to your listening device for free. Well, thanks to our monthly supporters called the Gospel Partners. If you'd like to partner with us, we'd be very, very grateful. Simply visit wretched.org.